All right. Oops. All right. If folks could please start taking their seats, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much.
Good morning.
We've been waiting on permits. And Lake Oswego Habitat project.
I'm not going to whistle call at you,
Everybody can stop.
but we will if that's what it takes. Oh. Good. Donnie. One more time. That was the opposite of the whistle call?
Yes, yes.
Good morning, everyone.
How are you doing?
Wait. This is obviously a great opportunity to see each other. So I'm glad we all had that opportunity. And I see folks that I saw on the plane last night coming back from DC. So welcome. I got in very late and then I'm up very early. But I wanted to make sure I was here for this because it's a very important part of our conversation moving towards some big decisions. So thank you for being here. And also Happy New Year to you all. I think it's the first time I've seen many of you in the new year, and it's a pivotal moment for Metro and for this region to be able to move forward a conversation after a year of discussion, engagement, and analysis, because we are moving towards trying to provide future stability and delivery with you, our partners, for regional funding to address homelessness. The people in this room have been part of the stakeholder advisory table since last spring, and you've engaged in dozens of meetings, engagements, and conversations. And I just want to say I appreciate that. All of the information that you have provided has been brought forward and been part of what the council has been working on. You also represent a wide array of constituents, communities, and interests, but you all care deeply about the future of our region and recognize that homelessness and housing instability has affected every corner of this region and is now affecting our economy. We face a crisis of housing instability and homelessness, and it touches every corner of the region, especially folks who have already been struggling with economic and racial inequality. Perhaps more importantly, we face a crisis of hopelessness. Even as we are improving and transforming thousands of individual lives, the broader public view is that we're still falling short. And the number of homelessness and housing instability led to some credibility in a lot of people's viewpoints. I don't even know if I introduced myself, but I'm Lynn Peterson, Metro Council President. That's how much sleep I've had. But thank you. Meanwhile, the critical work of the Supportive Housing Service Program is in peril. The existing program will end in 2030. And so will the funding for all the services, shelter beds, and supportive housing that's been created. If the program is not extended, it will soon force a ramp down to begin. In addition, funding for affordable housing is running out in our region, as you all know, as the Metro and Portland bonds are fully allocated. And we remain tens of thousands of units short of meeting the need. So all that said, we're gonna make lemonade out of the lemons, right? We have an amazing opportunity with the support of our voters. The Supportive Housing Service and the Regional Housing Bond were both unprecedented on a national scale. So there's incredible potential and a unique opportunity to shore up these programs, make them work better, and keep them going if we can reach voters with a proposal that addresses their concerns. So I think I'm going to turn it over to, oh, it's up there and I can't see it with my glasses off. Yeah, we'll turn it over and to Drawbridge. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. We are so thrilled and privileged to be back in the room with all of you. As a reminder, my name is Nitya, and along with my colleagues Becky and Sara, we are here to facilitate our conversation. So before we dive into the important work for today, we did want to take a moment to introduce ourselves with each other, make some time for connections. So in a minute, I'm going to invite you all to stand up, please, and find two other people not at your table. And we would love you to have a conversation about the prompt. Could we get the next slide, please? As we step into this new year, based on what you're feeling right now, what's one wish that you have for the future of our region? So whenever you're ready, please stand up and find two other people not at your table to pair up with. Thank you.
Don't want me.
Please start wrapping up and find your seat. All right, please wrap up your conversations. Please find your seats. Thank you. All right. All right, so please find your seats if you haven't. Thank you. There was a lot of energy in the room, so we would love to hear from anyone who's willing to share. Is there anything you heard that was energizing, inspiring, any common themes? Yes, please, Chair Harrington.
My wish for the region is that we do not reduce funding for addressing homelessness this year.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. Anything else that bubbled up in your conversations that you'd like to share? Yes, please, Kimberly.
My wish, and I'm the executive director for PCRI, the largest Black-led affordable housing nonprofits, and my wish is that we make sure that permanent supportive housing dollars are going to support affordable housing providers, because we are experiencing a shift in the clientele that we're serving that need additional wraparound services.
Thank you, Kimberly. Any final thoughts and before we dive into the work today?
Yeah, I'll go.
Yes,
Yeah.
please, Margaret.
My wish is that we connect supportive housing services dollars to career pathways.
Thank you. Great. So with that, we are ready to get started. We will look at the agenda for today. So we've spent a little bit of time on welcome and introductions. What you're going to be hearing from next is the Metro team presenting the policy and proposal as it stands today. We'll take a quick break and then make space for all of you to have a conversation and then end with some next steps. So as we begin to hear the presentations, as before, I wanted to point you to a reflection sheet on your tables. So please use that to take notes, flag any questions. We will make space for Q&A at two specific moments between the Metro presentations. So with that, I'll hand it to the Metro team.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Marisa Madrigal. I'm Metro's Chief Operating Officer. For those new faces in the room, for those familiar faces that we spent a lot of time with last year, it's wonderful to see you again. Thank you for helping us get the band back together. It has been 7 months since we last met. So I'd like to begin with some background and a refresher. We'll start with a reminder of why and how this conversation started. And if we could advance the slide, please. Thank you. So in late 2023, advocates and providers recognized the challenge of a looming affordable housing funding cliff in our region and came to the Metro Council seeking a conversation to find solutions. Council established these project values exactly a year ago when they gave me direction to form the Stakeholder Advisory Table and begin other areas of work on a recommendation. These values, meeting the urgency of the need now into the future, protecting the stability of existing SHS and bond programs and the people who depend on them, being pragmatic about the complexities of public opinion and stakeholder needs, lifting up racial equity in how we understand the challenge and potential solutions and in the decision-making process itself, and ensuring transparency and improving accountability to each other and to the public at large. Next slide. Yes. The Stakeholder Advisory Table was one channel of feedback that informed my recommendations to Council. Others, which you can see on this graphic, included community partnership with the Coalition of Communities of Color and its coalition members, which engaged scores of people around the region from impacted communities. Direct engagement with our county and city partners, as well as the SHS and bond oversight committees, the Tri-County Planning Body, Metro's Committee on Racial Equity, MPAC, and more. Detailed conversations led by our housing department with housing and services practitioners and experts, and public opinion research. All this engagement started with an open question about whether to pursue a new bond, let affordable housing funding end, or explore how to apply supportive housing services funds in new ways. From there, the conversation branched out to ask how, as a region, we can make our response to homelessness more strategic, accountable, and sustainable. The engagement at this table over 5 in-person meetings and 2 subtopic conversations was incredible. Respectful, hopeful, willing to dive into difficult questions, pursue trade-offs, and sit with those tensions. As you may recall, I issued my recommendation to the Metro Council in July, and this table was a huge contributor to that, both where we had alignment and where we didn't. We never sought full consensus. The intention from the beginning was that we should gather all the different opinions in a diverse room as well as other channels of input. Though in reality, there was remarkably broad agreement about many things. I worked hard to reflect the areas of greatest agreement among all those channels of input, as well as noting the areas where there was less agreement and even concern from some parties. It was clear to me that the majority of this group, as well as the general public and stakeholders not in this room, did not want us to stand by and let housing funding or SHS funding end. There was general consensus about the wisdom of expanding and extending SHS, and that we would need to improve oversight and accountability as part of those changes in light of strained public trust. I also recognized and discussed concerns about tax fatigue, the need to better include more partners like cities, the need for stronger regional standards in areas like metrics and data collection, procurement, and contracting. The recommendation laid a proposed path for further council and partner discussion, including further discussion about the best way to balance some of the inherent tensions underlying these project values as they played out in decisions like pursuing a sunset extension combined with a tax rate reduction, the balance of regionalization and local flexibility, and the prioritization of ongoing services funding while also making a meaningful impact on housing need. These were the kinds of questions that our counselors, jurisdictional partners, and coalitions of providers, business and community groups spent the last 6 months exploring in a variety of settings. And I'll hand it over now to Val Galstad to go over that process.
Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Val Galstad. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the Director of Strategic Operations here at Metro. And I'm been on the project team working on this for the last year. So after the completion of the COO recommendation, which Marisa sort of just walked through, this became a council-led process with Council President Peterson, particularly at the helm. Council jumped in immediately, holding 4 work sessions from July to early October. And I'll just note that our council typically takes the month of August off for recess. So that was with like a whole month of not holding public meetings in that time. They still held 4 work sessions in that time to discuss elements of the recommendation and some of the tensions that Marisa just mentioned. They held work sessions specifically on tax scenarios, best practices, and best practices around key performance indicators. At the same time, Council President Peterson was also directly engaging with county chairs on behalf of Metro Council to continue the conversations from spring that had happened at more of a staff-to-staff level. This was in hopes of finding areas of greatest agreement between elected leadership for reforms like governance and reforms on the allocation methodology. This would inform where council would need to act. Meanwhile, Portland Metro Chamber and Here Together leadership, who are in the room today, who themselves had been instrumental in shaping the first supportive housing services measure, and who agreed that the region has a duty and responsibility to get this right, began meeting with one another to try to identify their bottom lines and how they could support a potential reform package. And also during this time, staff and counselors were providing updates to the supportive housing services and affordable housing bond oversight committees and the Tri-County Planning Body to hear their feedback and keep them updated as the work progressed. So these conversations and engagements informed each subsequent council work session, building and ultimately leading to council developing and adopting a resolution, taking formal action to adopt a resolution on October 17th that formalized their direction for developing the policy package that we're going to discuss today. And so when you look at the resolution, and it is in your packets, it's 8 pages long and in legalese. So I don't expect you to, commit that to memory right now, but it is there for reference. But when you look at the resolution, it's easy to see the work of this stakeholder advisory table underpinning the key takeaways that drive that resolution, including recognition that regional funding for services and housing is going to be needed for longer than a few more years, and an acknowledgement that that funding is going to need to do more. There's a call to create a truly regional and integrated and long-lasting supportive housing services and housing program built around a clear strategy and key performance metrics to ensure better outcomes. There's a need for as much predictability and stability as possible for ongoing services and the people and providers who depend on them. And also it highlights, the need for reforms to regional oversight and administration to create greater transparency and accountability, a learning culture, and the ability to make changes when needed, while also recognizing that local partners need the flexibility to develop their own individual plans to meet their unique needs of their communities. Next slide. So passage of the resolution on October 17th began the final phase of engagement and conversation as we worked with counselors to shape a proposal that reflects their direction. The next 2 slides show a partial listing of groups that have been engaged, shared input directly with Metro counselors to help shape this proposal. Council president and other Metro counselors have sat down with the county chairs, mayors, coalition leaders, and business leaders to explore the possible and to hear alternative proposals. Counselors and staff have also traveled across the region, sometimes virtually, to present and hear feedback from dozens of city councils. This slide shows some of the cities and counties whose elected leaders have been represented in these conversations or who are scheduled to have conversations with counselors or staff before the decisions are made later this month. And I'll just note that on these 2 slides, there's a little addendum at the bottom that being engaged and listed on these slides does not necessarily mean that there is, full consensus on what the proposal is. Next slide. Additionally, more than a dozen organizations have provided input to council. Here's a partial list, and note that some of these communications were signed by multiple organizations who are members of broader coalitions, and we did not list all of those. Councilor staff have also had repeated discussions with our oversight committees for supportive housing services and the affordable housing bond, as well as the Tri-County Planning Body and MPAC, the Metropolitan Policy Advisory Committee. Finally, council also held several additional work sessions during this time to discuss topics like allocation and governance. As staff, our job has been to be responsive to the questions we've heard, provide facts, and refine options as counselors reflect on what they've heard. And I just wanted to quickly give a shout out to all of the staff and partners in the room. Many of you have spent many hours over the last year working with us on this. Our staff from housing, finance, Metro attorney, government affairs, the COO's office, as well as all of you in this room and the people who are not here today, just, really come from a wide range of expertise and experience. And I've been heartened throughout this process that even though we have such different perspectives at times, we're all trying to reach good outcomes together, and we are leaning into difficult conversations together. And that is what has made this process, I think, so special. So next, Andy is going to provide an update on where things are now and where things are going to go next or could go next. But I'll just pause a moment and see if there are any clarifying questions for me or Marisa about the process to date at this point. Mayor Beatty.
Thank you. So twice this week, I've heard an interesting phrase from Metro that I want to give you a chance to tell us what you mean by it. When you say you're not seeking consensus, to me, that sounds like you're giving yourself an out to not do what the majority of us are recommending. And so I've heard it twice. I want to give you a chance to clarify what you mean by we're not seeking consensus, because why are we in this room if you're not seeking our consensus?
Want to take it?
Thank you, Mayor Beatty, for the opportunity to clarify. I think what we meant by that is, with 30 people in the room coming from different perspectives, that it probably wasn't practical to get to a point where we all agreed on everything, but that it was important for us to create a space where we could hear all those perspectives, collect those, kind of categorize them. Here's where there is consensus, here's where there isn't, here's where there's concerns. So I think we meant it more in the process than we don't, care about what you think, because if we didn't, we wouldn't, like this entire year and all the work that has gone into this has been about hearing things from different folks, whether we agree with them or not, whether we want to hear them or not, whether it's our idea or not. We really have been committed to having an open process that is not defensive and is just, trying to gather information. Thank you.
Good morning, Shannon Singleton, New Multnomah County Commissioner for District 2. I wanted to talk about, or just ask about this value, the first value of urgency. I'm not clear on where the urgency is coming from. I know that we've got a sunset, but it feels like there's a level of urgency to move now that I'm not really looped into.
I'll just hang out up here for a little bit. So I think the original urgency that we felt was that, as we were looking at the success of our affordable housing bond, we have reached a point where all those dollars are committed. We're having great success, more than we expected, building more units, more affordable units than expected, but also recognizing that permits for even market rate housing are slowing down to zero. So there's, while we have this like looming gap that we're trying to address, and we felt like if we don't ask this question now about affordable housing funding, we will experience a gap in availability of funding. So that means kind of the whole pipeline dries up. Not only are we not building housing, but all the infrastructure that we've built up as a community to support that process would be in jeopardy. So that's, piece number one. I think number two, when we look at the SHS funding and that sunset in 2030, that feels like it's right here. That does not, 5 years might feel like a long time out in the world. It's maybe a college degree if you take an extra year to complete it. But, for the folks that we are concerned about serving, that feels very, very front and center. And we can envision, in a couple of years without a plan to extend, having to start to ramp down. So that is where the main urgency came from.
So maybe we'll have space to talk about this later, but I don't know that we're all in alignment on that. I think the housing development urgency may be different from an SHS, going back to the ballot conversation. So hopefully we can talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Catherine Harrington, Chair of the Washington County Commission. So this committee, as you said, did convene and provided feedback as of May that we support the inclusion of affordable housing as a use, as long as it does not reduce funding for homeless services. Unfortunately, your COO recommendation included in the October resolution does propagate the opposite. It does, in fact, take the funding backwards. So it's very difficult for me to continue sitting here as a member of the advisory committee when that's been done, continues to be propagated, as exemplified through your polling statement, which is in a Metro packet and not acknowledged as incorrect fact, which it is. So I also just want to bring to my fellow committee members' attention that Metro just issued a press release moments ago at 9:30, maybe in your inbox already, with regard to the work that we're doing here and now. Thank you again for reconvening us.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Andy?
Well, good morning. I'm Andy Shaw, Director of Government Affairs at Metro. I use pronouns like he and him. Before walking through the proposal as it stands, I want to remind us what we're seeking to solve for. And once again, I'll refer to the same values that guided your work, guided the council's work as well. So back on that urgency question, homelessness and housing affordability are the public's number 1, number 2, and number 3 priorities. I'll note that just this morning, the governor reissued a declaration of a homelessness crisis in the state for the 3rd year. On stability, stability means securing long-term ongoing funding for both services and affordable housing. It means prioritizing predictable funding for services and for rent assistance. On racial equity, we recognize that this challenge is disproportionately affecting people of color due to generations of discrimination. We want to build off of strong values we have already in the Metro Bond and the SHS program to prioritize equity in our solutions. We need to do a better job of including people of color and people with lived experience in the tables of decision-making and oversight, and improving our ability to track racial equity as an outcome in services and in housing. On transparency and accountability, I think it's important to recognize that we've learned a lot in standing up unprecedented regional programs in the last series of years, and that everyone's working really hard and doing their best to stand up these programs. With that, though, we've heard from folks in this room and the people who do this work every day that it's been hard to affect change. And it's clear when it's clear that things aren't working in the current program. People are struggling to find avenues to affect change. It's been hard to apply regionally consistent standards and practices to properly track data in a way that informs the public and that builds public trust. We've stood up an SHS oversight structure that's fundamentally built on looking in the rearview mirror and lacks teeth to enact changes. We've heard that clearly directly from today's oversight committee members themselves. On pragmatism, I know it frustrates many of you from conversations that we've had directly, but public opinion about the program and our collective handling of the crisis is pretty poor. We need to meet voters where they are today. We need to pay close attention to what their significant concerns are. Next slide. On that note, on the question of public opinion and maybe getting back to this question of urgency and timing, public opinion research that we've conducted over a series of years is painting a pretty concerning picture about where voters are, and we think we need to pay really close attention to that. Yes, our counties are making great progress in standing up the SHS program, and the impact that we are having is not always visible to the broader public. Each poll is a measure of a point in time, so we take it as it is at that moment, but the trends are clear to us. Skepticism of our efforts is growing, and time may be short to take action, which is part of what's putting the urgency under our feet. Voter awareness of the SHS program has increased over time. We don't have that on this screen, but voter support for the program has declined over time. Even more concerning, increasing numbers of voters say they don't believe that we're getting the results that we are seeing. That said, there is support for a measure if we get the details right, and there are enough partners helping to get information out to the voters. To approve the extension and expansion of SHS, a voter proposal needs to address head-on the combination, the pairing of homeless services and affordable housing. It needs to address governance and accountability, and it needs to be responsive to ongoing concerns about taxes. Let's go to the next slide. So you heard a little bit about how elements of the overall proposal came together. Val talked about ongoing council discussions, work with many people in this room that led to the October resolution for further direction. Val also discussed how a proposal on specific elements emerged out of discussions led by Here Together and the Portland Chamber in particular around extension and tax reductions. It was also mentioned that Metro councilors have engaged in recent months with county chairs, other elected officials, and others to explore these ideas and get feedback over time. So this slide describes the high level proposal that we want to pursue, and I'll get to in a minute steps to potentially enact that. So allowing funding to be used for permanent supportive housing and affordable housing. We've just talked about how there's a broad consensus about that change. Asking our local partners to pair services with affordable housing and to plan for that in their local implementation plans going forward. Extending the sunset to 2050 to ensure the continuation of services for those people who depend on it. Also, the length of that extension, which we noted in the COO recommendation, is also intended to allow for leveraging financing of rent payments into permanent supportive housing, so that 20-year extension is an important factor as well. Prioritizing services in the allocation of funds with further focus on those with deepest need. Carrying forward our SHS and housing bond equity goals. Improve tracking of program outcomes, simplifying and strengthening the governance structure, establishing a collaboratively developed regional action plan with key performance metrics, indexing the high earner income tax threshold to inflation. So we're continuing that as a high earner tax, and then reducing personal income tax rates. And we start here with a proposal now on the table that would mean resetting the current rate to 0.9% in 2026. And setting the rate of the tax extension at 0.75 beginning in 2031. We know there are ongoing discussions about that proposal. So next slide. You saw all the engagement we've done. We've had lots of conversations. The tenets of this proposal that I just walked through have been subject to a lot of public discussion and a lot of feedback directly to our counselors, to staff, et cetera. We want to acknowledge that we've heard a lot of concerns, first about the potential impact to services, as the chair just noted. We've heard from many of you concerns about changing the immediate allocations to counties and affecting the ongoing delivery of services. We've heard the impact that allocating some funding to housing might have on the ability to continue to provide services appropriately. We've heard concerns about bringing additional partners to the table through an allocation to cities. And much of that echoes what we heard from you last spring, which was to let's ensure that housing is added as an investment option, but not a drag on the ability to continue providing services. We heard concern about the potential impacts of regionalization. So strong concerns about ensuring that the work of the TCPB is rolled into the new governance structure and the good work of developing regional systems is not lost. We believe that the proposal improves regionalization in a number of different ways, including this clear regional action plan, the development of key performance metrics that drive decision-making, the clear ability to create more consistent regional standards, practices, and so on, while also continuing to implement through locally driven decisions. On the tax cuts, we've heard concerns about the reduction in annual funding levels related to enacting tax rate reductions. And we've heard concerns about the timing of potential tax rate reductions. For example, making a tax reduction immediately versus putting that out into the future. And again, we know there are active conversations about the tax rate question and a lot of work going on to try to find a solution that everyone can live with there. On timing, that was just raised this morning. We've heard lots of concerns about timing. Why not wait to consider some or all of these changes later on? We feel like there are many risks to waiting. The question is, will things improve or change if we give more time and continue the work of developing the proposal for a later date, getting closer to the point in time when the expiration of the SHS is looming and beyond the end of the pipeline of spending funding on affordable housing, of having resources that I think it was Councillor Lewis at one of our sessions talked about having been to the last groundbreaking in her district for a unit. We also know right now voters are very frustrated, and we are losing ground with voters on the program. So, will visible homelessness improve so dramatically in the next couple of years that we see a reverse in the sentiment amongst voters in that time? We're deeply concerned, as you heard already, about facing the prospect of having to begin planning an actual ramp down of the program within just a few years if we don't have a plan for action on extending the program. And I'll leave it to the Council President Peterson to maybe say more about some of those thoughts about timing in a minute. But next slide. So I want to talk here about the thinking for action on that larger proposal that I just walked through. We've been working hard to find ways to be responsive to the many concerns that you and others have raised while still advancing a plan for action. So represented on this slide are the elements that would go into a voter referral ordinance, which is the measure section. And then secondly, elements that would be in a companion ordinance, actions that would not be referred to voters. So in other words, the voter referral here is slimmed down and simplified, including key elements that require voter approval, and those that help us meet our voters where they're at, and those elements that help us to build a broad coalition. This includes the extension of the program, creation of a simplified single oversight body, the tax rate for the extension, allowing affordable housing as an investment, defining goals for stable services funding allocation and opportunities for future affordable housing funding, and key requirements for local implementation plans. The companion ordinance would then contain the elements of the proposal that need to be set in motion if the measure passes, and would lay out timeframes for completion, allowing time for additional collaboration on governance, on allocation structure, on the development of the regional action plan and metrics, as well as local planning. The companion ordinance would also include indexing of the tax income thresholds and any immediate tax rate changes. So first of all, this approach is meant to respond to many requests to take more time on key elements that do not require voter approval. Secondly, in this structure, the method of allocating funding to the county would not change at all for a number of fiscal years, allowing us all more time to identify the best ways to stabilize services funding and then carefully plan for allocations of available funding to housing. And although we explored an explicit allocation to cities, we're instead proposing to require each county and its cities to collaborate within the local planning process, recognizing that cities must be viewed as vital partners in all of this work. The companion ordinance would also propose a transition timeline for the work of the current oversight committees to wrap up and be deliberately pulled into the new oversight body's work. So we're not losing all of that good work, we're advancing that. Funding for this regional program development work would become part of Metro's funding allocation. I'll also note here on the revenue side, the indexing of the personal income tax rate has a minor impact on revenues going forward. The income tax rate reductions being considered have a somewhat more significant impact on revenues. But the driver of annual revenue changes will be volatility of the two revenue sources, the two income taxes, due to the ups and downs of the economy and individual economic decisions. So changes in revenue year to year from this volatility will dwarf the impacts of indexing and the tax rate changes being considered. We believe that worrying about and finding ways to manage for that volatility is one of the most important areas to focus on. On the flip side of this, we estimate the extension of the SHS program and these taxes will raise something between $5 and $10 billion. So $5 to $10 billion over the course of the extension of the program to address homelessness and housing, one of the #1 priorities of the residents of our region. Let's go to the next slide. So just.
Sorry, question on the previous slide.
Yeah, back,
Sorry.
look, one slide back.
Sorry, just clarification. So those 5 bullet points for the measure, do all of those require voter approval? That's why they're in there, or can some of those be done administratively?
So I think what I shared was that we're looking at elements that require voter approval, elements that meet the voters where they're at, and elements that help us build a broad coalition for the measure.
And so Metro couldn't establish a single oversight committee without voter approval? Question mark?
I think, again, the ideas around accountability, around stronger, simplified governance is something that voters are interested in weighing in on, is what we're arguing.
So you could do it without voter approval, but giving them that is something that's gonna help them get to the ballot.
Pairing a number of items together is what builds voter support for an extension of the program. On its own, in the polling that we've done, and if we just ask voters to extend the tax today, it looks like the answer would be no. But when you combine governance, simplification and accountability, when you combine that with housing, funding for housing is incredibly important as well. That combination of items gets us to a place where it looks like voters are saying yes.
And so I guess my point is that a lot of this, several of these points can be done without going to the ballot.
And that's what we've tried to lay out here is what do we think are the critical items that could go into a referral, the slimmed down things that in combination are likely to gain voter support, as opposed to those items that we've heard from many of you just require some more discussion, some more time, moving away from, potential impacts on service funding in the immediate years to come, et cetera.
Thanks.
So let me do one more slide. Okay.
Those bullet points, if you don't mind, my name is Margaret Salazar, I'm CEO of Reach CDC. And just on that point, defining allocation goals for services and housing, what level of detail would be in the measure? And I will maybe prompt Fraud to say, I understand that what you're saying about voter sentiment and wanting to make sure that there are some key deliverables for voters to get behind. I would want to make sure that while we might be allocating dollars for services versus housing, we're not locking ourselves into a certain number of units at a certain level of affordability or production versus preservation, because we as developers need to be able to be nimble to meet market conditions. So I would just staunchly advocate not to lock ourselves into numbers and production goals in the ballot measure.
Thank you for that. So in the housing bond measure back in 2018, we were very deliberate about estimating the number of units that we thought we could produce and modeling out what all those costs might be. We are not considering doing that at all in this measure because of the uncertainty of how much money would be available for housing. Prioritizing the services first and then working towards what might those future allocations look like that are stable for counties, but may provide some additional resources for housing. So next slide, just an overview of the next steps here. So we plan to bring to the council on January 16th this measure referral ordinance, as well as the companion ordinance for review and discussion. Then on the 23rd, first public hearing on the ordinances themselves. We expect councilors may want to propose changes or amendments if they hear comments back from you, from the public and others. And January 30th is an additional meeting to further consider any changes. And then February 6th would be the target for consideration of referral of the measure and action on the companion ordinance. And with that, I think I'm turning it over to Council President. Oh, right.
Kabir, please.
This is just my next thing here. What's the process for, oops, sorry.
What's the process for the companion ordinance versus the measure? Does the companion ordinance get passed before the measure? And is that only a council decision?
It is, so both actions are council decisions. The council would consider enacting an ordinance that then they also then vote on a referral resolution that sends that ordinance to the ballot. They would separately vote, I think, in the same meeting on the companion ordinance. So they're moving together at the same time, but the thinking is that the companion ordinance is largely, needs to have the measure pass to become effective. So they'd be enacted on at the same time, but effectiveness would depend on voter approval.
Thank you, Andy. Oh, did you have another question,
I
Mark?
did have another question. This one is more of a strategy question around timing. I know we're going to have the timing conversation. But even if we are coming on board with the understanding of.
Sorry to interrupt, Margaret. Could you use the mic, please? We're just capturing. the
Great,
voice.
absolutely. So even if we are on board with the idea of we have to move quickly, we can't wait. Can you talk to us about the thinking around the May election date as opposed to a larger turnout election date? Just for those of us that don't live and breathe that electoral politics every day.
So yeah, underneath that question is that there are different folks who show up to elections in a general election year, like this last year, or in 2026, as opposed to an off-cycle election year like 25 or an odd number of years, essentially. The polling that we did in preparation for a potential referral to last November compared to a referral to this May looks largely the same. Voters are responding in very similar ways, even though fewer voters do show up in 25 than they did in 24. So just from a polling perspective, we're not seeing dramatic differences in how our voters are responding to this question. And we're seeing pretty strong consistency over time amongst voters in their views of these issues, if that helps. I mean, if you want to get into ballot discussions, it's sometimes less expensive and easier to communicate with voters when there are fewer items on the ballot than in, say, this last election in November. It would have been nigh impossible to communicate with voters with all the other noise that was out there, and much more expensive to reach voters in that process. So there's a variety of different ways to think about timing.
Could we go to Margaret? I'm sorry.
I was about to.
Margaret, and I saw Councillor West, and then Commissioner. Please,
Shannon.
Margaret, go ahead, please.
Me?
Oh, Margaret had her hand up. Yeah. Oh, Elizabeth, I'm so sorry. My apologies.
Peggy. Who's that? So sorry, Elizabeth Mazar
thank
Myers, West Side Economic Alliance. Sorry, another question. So when we first talked about this last year sometime, there had been this extraordinary level of collection of dollars that was unexpected. And so there was this big sort of pool of dollars that had been unspent and whatever. And the recent projections for Metro are much lower. And I didn't see any charts here. I know when you guys were at WEA, you gave us that great chart that showed the dollars sort of doing this. I'm just wondering, I feel like this is really loud. I'm not an affordable housing person, but somebody on my board is, and said that the dollars that are now available are not significant enough for long-term bonding to make a dent into building housing. And that was their take on this. And so I'm just wondering, we're no longer talking about billions of dollars annually or whatever it was. Like, we're now talking about tens of millions. So I'm just curious about what that math looks like. And it would be great to see those numbers. Thanks.
So a few things to unpack there. We did start the year with a significant amount of money in carryover at Metro, at the counties. And that was part of the discussion of, was there an opportunity to use some of those resources or resources above what we thought we were going to raise in the SHS tax itself towards housing. The counties have largely allocated or identified ways to spend that carryover now, and over some period of years, in addition to the annual allocations that they're getting. So we do still have some carryover, and there's discussion of that potentially being an initial seed for some housing. And then I think there were discussions maybe fall of 23 about potentially trying to bond a portion of the SHS revenue towards housing, which is what you're getting at. And I think that folks walked away from that pretty early on, because that would require prioritizing the housing funding over the services funding. And I think pretty quickly everyone came to the conclusion that's the wrong priority. We should be prioritizing services and then seeing what we have for housing and using those resources for housing. So I think the way we're thinking about it now is once we've established what a good, stable, ongoing floor is for county services in a future year, what is available potentially above that can be banked and used as pay-as-you-go resources for housing, in addition to immediately giving counties flexibility. If there's a building to purchase that could be a PSH building now, they could do that within their existing allocation.
But can't counties already do that? If there's services connected to the building, can't counties already do sticks and bricks?
In an easy answer,
as long as there's services there?
The easiest answer is no, but it is complicated.
The
It
county
depends.
thinks, counties say yes, Metro says no, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I didn't realize there was a, got it.
No, there's no disagreement between our attorneys as far as I understand. You can use services resources. You can use services resources for capital projects, for capital funding in limited circumstances when it's directly related to the services, for example, a shelter. We do not think you can build ongoing permanent supportive housing or acquire it or build affordable housing with the services funds.
And just for the record, I'm getting lots of nods, yes, from county folks that there is disagreement from county council, so not just wanna.
I'd like to move to Commissioner West. You had your hand up next, and then we'll go to Commissioner Singleton and Angela next.
Thank you, Commissioner Ben West, Clackamas County. Metro came and presented before Lake Oswego earlier this week, and the issue around the polling came up. And it was said, hey, from Metro says, hey, usually when we start to tell voters more all the good stuff we're doing, they seem to get on board and like it. And I quote, the more the voters seem to learn about this, the more they don't like it. And then Metro said, we must proceed forward with this ballot measure. We don't have the trust of the voters, and for goodwill and for good reason. And I think that's one of the big key things lacking here. And the May ballot, to me, you don't get, it's cheaper, but I think you tend to pull out some more fringes and the more of the voter base than you get a bigger consensus of residents overall. People just got done going through a big election, and to hit them again with such a big topic in May, to me, seems not like the wisest thing to do to get the biggest consensus and idea about what voters think in the metro area on this issue. It seems to be somewhat rushed to me right now doing this in spring. Another important point, we were just talking about forecasts, is that the forecast no longer is showing more money than we originally thought. And in Clackamas County, our numbers show that this would be catastrophic to our ability to provide services. That original premise for saying that we could also invest in housing, we don't see the dollars there or the ability or resources to do that. It also feels a little bit like we're kind of doubling down on housing, and we forget that this is also a human need that extends beyond four walls and granite countertops. It extends to the human need to help people recover from the trauma and the issues that are in their lives that cause them to no longer have a network and to be on our streets and to be suffering and struggling in this circle of despair. We're not dealing with that human element. It's housing, and it is creating an unbalanced approach to how we address this crisis in our community. I feel like that this will make this overall situation worse. Clackamas County feels like you're pulling the rug out from under us.
Thank you, Commissioner West, for your comments. We have a couple of more questions. Commissioner Singleton, please.
Thank you. I think the piece around the budget and the forecast changing is really important. We're actually facing a budget deficit at Multnomah County based on the new projections. I believe it's about 55 million. I think I just think it's important for us to know the polling is going to be we're going to need to see that. As a person who was a part of the Portland Housing Bond, the Metro Housing Bond, and this measure, and helping to build this structure over time for our community, we never went when the polling wasn't good. And the most recent polling I've seen does not indicate that we are going to win this ballot measure. And I think the worst thing we could do is go out and lose. So for me, it's going to be really important for folks to sit down, show us what the polling is actually saying so that we can make an informed decision on, should we actually go in May, or do we need to wait and look at other ballots? Yes, 2030 feels like a short timeline, but there are actually multiple elections between now and then. And I think we have opportunity to be really thoughtful and intentional about going out for this renewal.
Thank you, Commissioner. Could I go to Angela, and then I see Rachel and Mayor Beatty. Angela, please.
I'm responding to a question. Elizabeth, I appreciated your question. I'm not going to weigh in on the legalities of it. I'm not an attorney, but the practicalities. And I'm going to look to the gentleman next to you, Ernesto, to help me out here. But with the sunset, we're not able to use the long-term vouchers as a really important part of project base 0 to 30. So the extension is super important if we want to be smart about using the long-term vouchers as a way to make different projects pencil out. And I've referenced before a project in Hillsborough, the Dolores, where Ernesto and his team had to go out and find $8 million at the last minute because of the 2030 deadline on this program. So.
Thank you, Angela. Rachel, please go ahead.
Hi,
Thank you.
Rachel Duke, Community Partners for Affordable Housing. And I just want to say for the, as I'm listening to people talk here, that, and I know that you guys know that I have a lot of strong opinions that I've expressed to all of you up there. But I also want to say that on some level, we are our own worst enemy at getting this passed if we can't find a path forward that we can agree on. And we're kind of, if we have obvious dissension in the press and in the community, it's going to be harder to get a bond measure that we mostly agree on through, because all the public will see is how much we don't agree with each other. And that doesn't mean that I'm super stoked about all of the elements in the current proposal. I mean, my main concern is that we're not necessarily always taking a systems approach. And that goes for even thinking about when we decide to carve out pieces for housing. And as a housing developer who is a little bit panicked about where is the next project going to come from, I say that with a lot of concern about how we're going to do more housing. But as a services provider, I know that that housing isn't going to be effective if we don't have the services there. So there's a lot of stuff to work through. But if we can't come together in some way, the ballot measure won't pass, because folks will just see that we can't come together. That's all.
Thank you, Rachel. Mayor Beatty, please.
Yeah, I don't disagree with Rachel's point. However, I'm here today representing the region's mayors. And we had a meeting to talk about kind of where we are with the proposal. And we have a couple, and there's a question baked into this, so I'm just not going to monologue at you. When we look at the data in your opening statement around voter approval is going lower, so we have to go to the ballot. What I find frustrating as the person that has to answer directly to voters, people find mayors everywhere. They might not find Rachel, they might not find state senators or other levels of government. Guarantee they find their mayor. What we are not spending our collective energy around talking about is how do we win voter approval by doing what they asked us to do, which is reduce homelessness, instead of going to the ballot to squeak a measure in before their opinion drops any lower. We're not even talking about how to make it better. And so the mayors collectively, I think, are in a position of opposition right now because we're not addressing the fundamental issue of reducing homelessness. The other piece is we are not making cities whole in this scenario. What the county's projections are is about what county services are. And we agree, we want to come in line with the counties, but they're not taking into account the extra things that cities need around safety concerns in our libraries and cleanup in our parks, and making sure that, like for Beaverton, we have 5 public safety officers that address this. As we are heading under a crushing budget deficit in the city of Beaverton, and not just the city of Beaverton, every city and the counties are in these same budget issues over Measure 5 and 50. We're going to have to cut these services that we're doing out of our general fund to the tune of $5 to $6 to maybe even up to $7 million. So that is going to have a direct impact on Beaverton's ability to provide these services. So while there still is not putting us at the advisory table, thank you, that's great. There still is not a solution to make cities whole in this scenario. And the mayors will come out in force to tell our voters that we should be pushing Metro, pushing ourselves to address the issue, not just get a ballot measure over the line. So what are you going to do for cities beyond put us at the table?
Thank you, Mayor.
That was actually a question.
So, Mayor Beatty, I think that we have heard from the cities loud and clear that there needs to be a role in this. What we've done is heard every single one of you that there is still conversation to be had. So pulling apart what should be in a ballot to get the authority to do what we want to do in general is important. Getting to the specifics that you're asking for is just as important, but it doesn't need to be in the ballot. But you do need to know that it's going to be discussed.
I disagree.
So what I am here to tell you is, picking up on Rachel's comments, this is an exercise in trust. And I'm going to say it again, as I did at the table with the counties and cities. It is only up to the people in this room to make this change. It is only up to the people in this room. It is our responsibility to have these conversations and to hear each other. And we have heard from each and every single one of you, your worries, your concerns, what you've achieved, and what you are worried about losing ground on. We cannot rush getting to some of these answers, but what we can do is take advantage of a situation to be able to actually accomplish what you want to accomplish by moving forward and being proactive to be ready. So I ask you, as we're going through this, how do we get to that level of trust? What is it going to take? Because Metro is not here to dictate. It is here to collaborate and find a way to make this better for everybody on the ground and get all of these things done. The one thing that we were just talking about, what do we hope for the region? My hope is practicality and not taking sides so that we all just sit there and say, well, I can't because I don't see me 100%, but I see me 80%. And until I get to 100%, it's a no-go. At some point, we need to have that trust that every single one of these issues will be dealt with so that we can move on and just get the shit done. Because that's really all we want to do in this room, right? We want to build the housing. We want to take care of the people. So I just ask you, as we go through this, we can get all fluffed up. We can have the hair on our neck stand up that 100% of what we're saying is not what we actually want to see. Or we can say, here's what we can do. Because there's a lot right here. There are a lot of conversations that I had to get us to this point that I never even thought would be on the table, like an extension of 20 years. So let's look at what we've got. As I said, let's really look at how we can take the lemons that we have and make the lemonade. But if all we're going to see is that there's no sugar in it for me right now in this immediate, then I think we have a massive problem. And if we want to acknowledge that, I'm 100% there. We need to acknowledge that. If there's zero trust, let's just acknowledge it. Let's be out there and say it. Okay? But I really do believe we can get there. And we've tried to basically pull out the conversations that still need to be had. We have also tried to make sure that we are, as a region, ready to go in the moment when we're ready. Okay? So I think let's just take it down a notch and understand that we are all in this together. We're all trying to find a way to row in the same direction. And I do not like being in a canoe with my husband because I want to steer. But we can't all be steering. We can't all be steering. We have to row together. So thank you. If you want to answer some more questions.
Yeah, we'll go to Kimberly and then over to you, Chair Harrington, and then Ernesto, please. Kimberly, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree. We all have to row in the same direction, get along in the sandbox, et cetera. To the mayor's comments about being reached by the public, the only person or people that are just as reachable are the affordable housing executive directors. When we are getting complaints from neighbors about issues that are going on in their neighborhoods as a result of not having enough security, safety, lighting, trash pickups, and all of these other things that when we build multifamily apartment complexes bring into neighborhoods that are not accustomed to additional people being in their neighborhoods. And so I'm looking for solutions in terms of how we can quickly upscale dollars to help mitigate some of the issues that do occur in neighborhoods when we do build affordable housing, particularly when you have people that are in the throes of addiction, domestic violence, that are having issues within these units. There's no strategy for some of us affordable housing providers to calm that down. And so we need help from the county to help offset some of these problems. And I think we need to really start talking about building up the workforce as we talk about building more units. Because quite frankly, I don't want to build anymore if we can't talk about being meaningful in these neighborhoods and delivering good results to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, Kimberly. Chair Harrington, do you want to go next, please?
Yes, thank you. I agree with Rachel that we should be working as partners. Mayor Beatty asked a really good question. And what we do know is that the Metro proposal does take us back in terms of resources for supportive housing services. This is a dictate. We've said loud and clear, we can't move at this pace. It's clear to me the Metro Council is ready to move at this pace, and it may satisfy PMC and Here Together as well. Washington County has a budget gap of $20.5 million. We are not prepared to be engaged on this additional effort for clarification with ordinance number 2, in line with even a November 25 measure. So we are going to need at least through this entire year to do all that is on the county's plate. And I don't think Washington County is the only county as we try to continue to deliver to the voter services from the 2020 measure and all of the other required county services. So we do need to pause. We do have a lot that we agree upon, right? And that we as a region are going to need to continue to work together in order to improve this region. But we cannot do it at this pace. Thank you.
Thank you. Ernesto, and then we have time for Commissioner West. Please go ahead.
Thank you. You know, I've been part of this process from the very beginning, from the first measure all the way to where we are today. I agree with many of you that obviously we need this measure to pass. I don't think we're trying to do this for this measure not to pass. But before we even get to the ballot, we have to support an imperfect proposal. This idea of consensus it's a nice idea, but it's never real. You know, there will always be disagreement, and that is part of who we are. In terms of timing, if history is right, you know, the city of Portland and the Portland metro region, you know, we tend to think things through for a long time. What that means to me is that we are slow and we like to, you know, keep things moving forward slowly and slowly. So the 5 years, I think, will pass pretty soon, and then we're going to find ourselves into a pickle that we cannot, you know, turn around. So on the timing side, I think that we need to act now. The proposal as is, I think it is a really good proposal. What I wouldn't like to see as a housing developer and service provider is for us to let too much time go in between and then not able to accomplish something. What is the option here? You know, there is some opposition, but I haven't seen any significant proposals that have gone also significant underwriting, such as what Metro has done. That's what Metro is here for, right? So to me, we need to move forward with something, and that something won't be perfect for everyone. I am in support of what we're doing today, and I am hoping that we can see that services and housing and vouchers and anything that we do, they are not separate. We're not trying to fight against, you know, the service providers versus the housing providers. all of it is the same. And I just heard once again this morning that our homeless population increased by 13% between 23 and 24. If anything, we have to double down on these efforts to find more funding and do it fast. We all know this, builders and developers, deal with these delays. It takes us 3 years, 4 years to build something from beginning to the end. If we were to start something tomorrow, by the end of this, the sunset of this measure, we're going to be finishing that project. It is insane, this how slow this world works. So we need to do something today because tomorrow's gonna be here sooner than you think.
Thank you so much, Ernesto. Commissioner West, we'll take a final comment from you.
Yeah, thank you. I just received message from County Council, Clackamas County Council, and Clackamas County is gonna have to refrain from making any more substantive comments. We have concerns and questions about the noticing requirements at this meeting that were not met. And so we are here in good faith, but we need to have a better understanding about how this meeting was noticed and if it is appropriate to continue.
Thank you.
Commissioner West, thank you for raising that concern. This meeting was noticed as a public meeting. It was noticed properly. It was noticed informing the public that the Metro Council would be here to listen. And so, appreciate that you have a different county council. We have our council, but Metro believes that the meeting was noticed appropriately. Thank you.
Just for feedback, it's my understanding that agenda has to be posted. That agenda was not posted 24 hours ahead of time. The entire Metro Council is here. That's what we have been told from our county council. I don't know if there's any other council that is in alignment with that.
Thank you all for engaging in this conversation. I know it's not easy, but thank you for being here and sticking with it. We're going to take a 15-minute break and reconvene at 10:45, which is when we'll have more time for conversation.
It was hard enough.
Well, that's one of those.
So they're all in the process of being parceled individually. According to
T.
Washington Clackamas
Wait.
Legal Counsel.
Endorphins.
We're doing.
All right, I'm gonna call us back to order here. Thanks, everybody, for all the time and the comments so far. I want to clarify the role of the council in being here is to hear your thoughts and not really participate in any way that we're not working towards a decision. So just so you understand that, the council is here to hear this conversation because we know that we need to hear directly from you and not third hand through anybody else. So it's always better to hear directly from you. So now it's your turn to reflect and share, not that we haven't already been doing that. We're not asking for endorsements or opposition to a proposal today. We're asking for your feedback on how we should move forward with the elements as they come together. What should be emphasized? How do we ensure the values are advanced? And how do we balance the tensions within them? The first thing I learned in planning school was multiple, vague, and conflicting goals. That's what a planner does. We are all planners today. You have to balance those multiple, vague, and conflicting goals all day, every day, right? And this is a big one, but it requires us to hold true, basically, that what everybody is saying is true. It is true. And we need to do it all, and we need to figure out how to do that in this times that we are in, which are much different than they were 5 years ago. So I'm going to pass it over to Nitya. Is that
Sada?
To Sam. And they're going to lead us through, Robert is going to lead us through a conversation, a facilitated conversation on specifics. So thank you.
Thank you, President Peterson. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all again. I'm Sada Negaline with Drawbridge, and we are going to now have time for you all to speak with one another. And we want to bring it back to the values guiding this process. And so we've talked and heard a lot about these values throughout our time together. And so what we're going to do now is have time at your table to discuss the proposal through the lens of these values. Now, given everything you've heard, there have been a lot of conversations, a lot of hard work, and we are grappling with varied and complex and interconnected needs for our community. And so acknowledging that, we want to look at these values and ask you, which of these values do you see are in tension with one another in the proposal that has been shared today? So for instance, urgency and stability. We know there is urgency driving this process so that there can be continued services and address homelessness and housing. And we also know that stability of those services is very important. So thinking about those two values in tension with one another, what is your advice to Metro Council on balancing those values, on navigating those tensions as they continue to work on this proposal? Questions? You will see at your table a large worksheet. This should be familiar to many of you. This is where we ask you capture the discussion at your table. So as much as you can, capture everyone's perspective, and please write legibly. We will be collecting these worksheets, and they will then be feedback to Metro Council to take into consideration as this process moves forward. All right, we will have about 20 minutes for you to have your table discussions, and then we will debrief and be able to hear from each table and what you discussed. All right, go ahead. All right, everyone, about 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes to wrap up your conversation. All right, folks, please capture your final thoughts on the worksheet. Make sure you've captured everyone's perspectives. If you haven't done so already, make sure you put the names of folks at your table. Fill in the names of who's at your table. All right. Well, thank you for that time and being able to have some lively discussion with one another. I'm actually going to turn things over to Metro for a moment. Before we do our report outs, we wanted to give an opportunity to hear from folks.
So, I mentioned earlier that there were ongoing. I mentioned earlier that there were ongoing conversations about the tax rate portion of this proposal. And I just wanted to acknowledge that there have been some other folks who have put some ideas or proposals in writing to the Metro Council or in other places, or, you know, in discussions, and just open up some space. I know Welcome Home in particular has written to our council with ideas around tax changes that might be responsive to some of the mood that I talked about earlier. I don't know if counties are interested in speaking to any of that as well, but I just wanted to open up that space for folks to share alternative ideas in the spirit of this ongoing discussion.
Yes, Commissioner Singleton.
I mean, I feel like a broken record on it, but I'm just going to say it again. I think for Multnomah County, with new commissioners, it's very much just been that we want to see the polling. We want to know if it's actually viable. And if it isn't, then let's continue to work together to make the improvements that we know we need. And working towards a ballot measure in the near future, but not feeling like we have to push to go in May of 25 if it isn't politically viable at the ballot.
Yes, Chair Harrington.
For the benefit of this committee, the 3 counties provided feedback to Metro Council President Peterson in meeting 5 of 5 amongst the 3 county chairs, MMC reps, PMC reps, and Here Together reps.
Hey, Molly, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm Molly from Welcome Home Coalition. So Welcome Home sent a letter to the council endorsed by hundreds of organizations and individuals. And in that one, we said, no reduction in the tax rate. We basically, our argument is like, don't ask the system to do more with less. However, I want to uplift and name that our membership, some of our membership sent a newer proposal recently with a concept of like a compromise of this 10% and 25% in 2031 reduction, that it would be leave the 1% for incomes over a higher threshold. I'm going to just throw out the number like 400,000, and offer the reduction for incomes under that. Because what we heard loud and clear is a concern about lower high income earners, right? Folks in that 125,000 to 150K range. We live in a really expensive West Coast city. So if those households are needing some savings, then let's give it to them, but not have a millionaire tax cut when the need is so high. So that is another proposal that's been brought forward that I hope that Welcome Home hopes makes it to the public table discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. John.
Hey there, John Isaacs, Portland Metro Chamber, and you can hear I'm getting over a cold, everybody. I appreciate that opportunity to talk, because I actually have to leave, and I desperately wanted to say, I want to just share our perspective on this to some of the questions that have been asked. Okay, so and I'll preface this by saying our regional State of the Economy report comes out February 20th. So I'm giving you a mini preview. Okay, but this year, all the counties are cutting their budgets. Okay, so homeless services are being cut. This year, there's no changes being made. It's the same thing we've been doing. They're cutting. Okay, it's not because of any tax cut that's been proposed. That's happening. And I can tell you that our report on the economy next month is not positive. Okay, it's scary. All right, it's scary. And this is a big public meeting, and I'm using that word intentionally. Okay, the Oregonian ran a story 2 weeks ago The state employment department has been putting out reports for months that back this up. So again, this is public, our state government's data, okay? I know there's a lot of skepticism in this room of the things that the chamber says. We are losing jobs in every sector of the economy except for government employees and healthcare. Okay, those are the only two sectors that are adding jobs. Every other sector is losing jobs. Everyone, okay? Like, I mean, every sector. That is, every sector is losing jobs year over year, okay? Our belief based on projecting this out, economies don't do this, okay? They do this, okay? The counties are gonna be cutting services for the next 4 years, okay? Whether we do anything, all right? That's our belief. I can't guarantee that. It's the future, but that will be talked about when our report comes out. So we're very, very concerned when you look at the decline, the eroding support for this measure, which is hardening. And I'm, by the way, Commissioner Singleton, I'm totally for what you just said. I think everyone here should see the polling, should be transparent. We should all talk about it, think, share our ideas on it. But you look at hardening and eroding public support for this measure, I can assure you the polling shows right now would not be renewed. If voters had to renew it today, it would not be renewed. Okay, the least popular part of this framework is the extension. Everything else is above 50% or even in the 60s, but the extension is underwater. Okay, so it's hard for us to view that voters are going to be ready to renew this and not just throw it all out in 4 years when we're in a declining economy in which budgets are going to be cut anyway. So we chose to dive into a discussion about reforming, fixing, and sustaining the measure because our organization thinks it would be a disaster for this measure to go away, okay? And I've heard all kinds of comments about what our real motivations are, and I am here to tell you that is our motivation, okay? I really appreciate what Welcome Home just put on the table. We've actually, just so everyone knows, I personally have sent an email to Metro's revenue team saying, hey, let's look at what that shows, okay? There's an openness to this idea. There's a few others that we put in there. One is, what if we only indexed to inflation, but it's retroactive to 2020? Okay, let's just look at that. What if all we did, we kept the rate the same, but we increased the income thresholds? Let's look at that. So I'm telling you all that so you know that the chamber is still in motion. We are still listening. We want this to be successful because we're worried that we're putting the most important resource in the nation for homeless services at complete risk. And like, do people really want to risk this going away? Like, we don't think that that's a risk that we can take. And that when you weigh the risks, the risk of doing this now is much less of a risk, especially when we're talking about, hey, if the business community is willing to pay a tax for 20 years, 20 years. I don't know if I've ever heard of that proposal in the state from any business organization. And so let's figure out how we balance the needs of the economy, our businesses, and our services to our homeless for the long run. That's our perspective. I'm not asking anyone to agree with us. I just want you to hear how we're approaching this. And I just want to say thank you, Molly, for putting that on the table. And let's look at it. Maybe there's something there that gets us to an agreement. I don't know, but we're willing to keep doing that to try to make this work, okay? We feel urgency to save this so that we preserve it for the long run, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Molly, and thank you for those of you that chimed in here. So in that spirit of balancing, right, these tensions that we all know exist and are there, we would love to hear from our tables what you discussed. So what came to the top? What bubbled to the top for those values that are guiding this process, that are in tension? And I'm going to ask that we hear from folks at your table that we have not heard from yet today. So be brave and put your voice in, please, if we haven't heard from you. And is this a question? You ready to go first? Great. Patrick.
Terrific. And this is my opinion here. It's not it was counter to, the majority of the table, but this is described earlier as an exercise in trust. So if you take the usefulness of the tax, what it's being used for, out of the equation and talk about trust in Metro, Metro has earned the skepticism that everybody has, especially where I'm from in Clackamas County. Now, we had a transportation measure that failed pretty miserably in Clackamas County because it was a bit of a bait and switch, right? And I see that sort of happening here. There's a sneakiness to Metro, right? And so some of the things that were said, that you want to have this during a off-year election, a school board election, we all know what that means, right? That means you have a certain electorate that's more in favor of longer-term taxes. The people that show up to elections, I think, is how that was described. I think that Metro is the wrong place for this. I think that we've been here for 6 or 8 months now talking about this, and this seems to be even more combative now than it was when it started, when people thought, well, this is just an extension or whatnot. This is the wrong thing to do, and Metro needs to walk away from this and send this back to the counties. If the counties want to continue on with this tax or expand this tax, the counties need to put this out, and Metro needs to go back to managing the zoo and garbage.
Are there other point of views at the table?
Steve Rodman. Well, not everybody agreed to that, but I know, and it was a good discussion. But it's indicative of the challenge we face. I mean, good news does not travel fast, and all 3 counties and all the providers and all the cities, we're doing a good job. Believe it or not, we are doing, and this is very difficult. It's very complex. It's not just a housing problem. I'm not a fan of putting a lot of money into housing unless it's directly connected to the population we're talking about. But this is an ongoing problem. We have more money per capita than any region in the country to do with this. What we have to do is work together as a region to kind of think about what do we all share in common and try to produce some results, because frankly, we're going to have less support. We all know that from the federal government, and that means through the state. But we have some local funds that are extremely flexible. Really, they're very flexible. We can tweak it. It does need to be extended. I think it needs to be sustainable. The question about when is a valid question. But I think what's so hard is that you ask an objective person, I ask people, do you think homelessness is better? Yeah. But I still see people here. Well, that's the challenge. You know, it is better, but we still are going to have challenges. And how do we align our systems better and do a smarter job? We have more ability to do that in any place in the country. I don't think we think that way. I think we're thinking about all the reasons why things can't work. But I think we really have to kind of take a step back a little bit and think about how do we really have the greatest impact.
Thank you, Steve. Yes.
Sorry, before we move on, just for folks who chime in, can you just please identify yourself, your name and who you are, just for the folks online and for the captioning. Thank you.
Thank you for that reminder. I'm also going to ground us back for this share out in where you see those tensions and your advice to Metro Council on navigating these tensions that we see. So I'm going to go to the next table here, and we'll just go around the room in that order. Yes, pick up a mic. Oh.
Sorry. I know, surprised I want to say something. So still Elizabeth from Westside Economic Alliance. And with all due respect to my good friend, John Isaacs, PMC doesn't speak for all the business associations in the region. So I just want to be clear on that.
Sorry, Shannon Singleton, she and her pronouns. We also talked about some of the lack of trust, and particularly I think it came up in some other areas of the region, really wanting to see some geographic equity and engagement as this work moves forward. And I think something else is just shoring up the trust of local electeds. I think I'm a bit of a broken record today, but there's new folks who don't necessarily have relationship yet. And so wanting to really have some time and ability to develop relationship across some of the new electeds in the region. There was a call out to really center people and their needs. Some get agreement on current allowable uses. Let go of the sense of urgency and consider a May 26 ballot. There was some discussion about changing the conversation to how we come together and how we win and get to that win. That was coupled with trust the data, really looking at, we do have good data, we do have good outcomes. We've heard from providers in this room. I think we see individually, but I know there's an issue about really looking at that data at a regional level and wanting to be able to use that to inform both the public and us so that we can make informed decisions. I think another piece of that is how do we start storytelling? I know a lot, even though I wasn't working in the field for a couple of years, I'm still so invested in ending homelessness work. But if you ask other people, they don't really know what's happening. And so how do we come together and develop a regional communication strategy? I think to the mayor's earlier point of really helping to change the narrative of what has been being accomplished and what we could accomplish together in the future. In this as well, I will just say that we, in the realm of data, I mentioned that I think things can sometimes get stuck at a staff level, and we need a mechanism to elevate them. And the data sharing agreement is one for me that 3 years later, I am real tired of talking about, and I haven't actually been in the conversations the whole time. And so what does that elevation look like, and how can we get some of the things done that I think you all need as Metro counselors, that we as counties want to be able to partner on so that we can actually tell this story at the regional level. Anything else that I missed? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Singleton. All right, so our next table, who's gonna be your representative? Of course. Yes.
I usually don't ask. So we had a good conversation here. So the first point we had was the conflict between stability and sort of calling out the fact that one of the values on the wall on these values is not transformation. We kind of think that we're getting at it maybe by talking about transparency and accountability, but we really do need to lean into the conversation about what's working and what's not working. And that means even practitioners like some of us need to be candid about maybe where things are falling short. And so that needs to be part of the conversation. And we need a theory of change for the region to really tackle the issue of homelessness. So that's kind of a value that we want to make sure it gets on the table that's not on the table right now. Pragmatism, as we're talking about pragmatism being viability at the ballot versus the urgency to find a solution. And that's just a tension that we're wrestling with. And then we talked about transparency and accountability and our feeling that those values are not being practiced today to the extent that they could be. And when I say today, I mean even in this conversation, and this is not a critique, but maybe just a call to action for a next step, which is that in order to really talk about options, we need more data on dollars. We hear the counties talking about their economic hardships. We hear other people talking about potential cuts to programs. We don't have that information as your advisory committee at our fingertips. And that's really limiting our ability to engage in this conversation. So how much money are we collecting now? How have projections changed? If we do nothing, what is at risk dollar-wise? If we pass this new proposed tax, how much will revenue change and what's at risk dollar-wise? What are the economic projections, as John Isaacs mentioned before he had to run? How does that impact revenue projections? And then our call to action to you all as our elected officials is that cities, counties, metro, you all need to act in good faith with the numbers on the table and come to an agreement on the numbers that you're looking at. As practitioners, it's very challenging for us to know that you're all not in agreement as you look at those numbers. And we look to you to have those conversations with each other. What's at risk if we do nothing? And what portion of the SHS dollars are tied to long-term endeavors? And that ties into the final point, which is, there's a perceived tension between stability and urgency, but I think you heard some comments earlier around, some of these dollars are tied to long-term endeavors. When we're talking about things like project-based assistance for affordable housing that gets to that deep affordability for folks coming out of homelessness. When we think about what Kimberly was talking about, the challenges of affordable housing providers and the long-term need that we have for operating subsidies. When we talk about things like transitional housing and purchasing and locking in those dollars, the urgency to solve this problem will get us to the stability that we need. They're actually not in conflict. And to Ernesto's point earlier, we have to have that certainty so that we can be good providers for this region over the long term. And that has to happen soon. I don't know that it has to be May, but it needs to be soon. And we need to recognize that those two things are actually not in tension. They need to work together. Team, did I miss anything? Thanks.
Thank you very much. All right, our next table over here, volunteer to share out. Molly looks like.
Okay.
Be sure to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, I'll kind of tag team with Molly and team here. So Mike Savara, he, him, his, I am the co-chair of, one of the co-chairs of the Supportive Housing Oversight Committee. So one of the things that we talked about was definitely the tension between urgency and transparency and accountability. And I'll just kind of like put my oversight committee hat on for a second. I think we've definitely seen the limits of the current structure for our ability to actually affect change. We often are kind of frustrated with the way the oversight role works right now. So we try and influence change or get a change, whether it's with Metro or with the counties, and often we're met with the inability to do anything and really no ability to make any differences. And so the oversight of the measure is really challenged. And I think there's things that we can do right now to actually change that experience, and really to dig into what our actual role is and how we can make sure that there's change happening now. So again, to the mayor's point, can we make moves right now? Can we make changes right now to increase trust, to make sure that voters see those changes are happening, and then communicate about them? I think people don't log on to 3-hour-long oversight committee meetings. They probably shouldn't be, zooming into those on a daily basis. So I think, how do we communicate about the work that we're actually doing and the work that's underway? So I think really taking the time to build that governance structure was a big theme that we thought was really important. What are the actual mechanisms that we can use? Even brass tacks, like what is it that the oversight body would approve, or what powers does the oversight body have to say no to something? A proposed budget, budget change, all of those things are currently not things that we necessarily have influence over, whether it's Metro's admin dollars or it's the actual county budget. So I think really getting specific on what the oversight functions are is really important for us to actually be able to go and say how this is working. Another piece is that we talked about is just the stability of the existing programs. We want to really see the regionalization across all 3 counties for things like contracting, procurement. I've heard from so many providers that are some of you in this room, just like how you have to do the dance with one county and then another, and it's different, and you're not sure if you're going to get paid in the same way, and you're balancing the different resources. That's kind of nonsense. We should have one consistent process for some of these things that are really impacting providers' ability to perform and get that work done. That goes on the same line with data. We have 3 continuums of care that we're combining, so it's challenging, but also we need to get on the same page. And I think really appreciate Commissioner Singleton's nod that things often are just getting stuck at the staff level, whether that's with Metro or with the counties. Things get stuck there, bogged down for a very long time. And we need to be able to, whether it's the oversight committee or some other mechanism, to elevate that up to the right level to say, just solve this problem, get in a room and make it happen. We can't have data sharing agreements go on for 3 years like that. So a couple pieces of advice that we had was, I didn't know this, but supportive housing services dollars can't currently be used for resident services at affordable housing. So that was a kind of wild idea that I didn't know was a barrier. Resident services are a critical part of our ability to have stable, affordable housing. So I think that's an easy opportunity to kind of increase the openness for that. I think defining our policy priorities and what best practices actually are. One of the things that we've seen and talked about in our oversight role is the continued trend to move towards kind of quick solutions over the long-term structures that we actually need in place, such as the vouchers and ARLA, to actually continue providing those support services. Long-term, things are not as fun. There's no ribbon cutting when you place someone in permanent housing, but it actually is how you end homelessness. And so we want to make sure that those are featured in our responses across all 3 counties. And then a couple pieces, just looking across out of our region for other successful endeavors that other regions have gone through recently, for what how they were able to pass measures that are similar to ours. I think Los Angeles had a similar one. I don't know if Molly, you want to.
Yeah, I just want to really quick share a story with folks about Los Angeles County that just passed a measure. They have measures so similar to our SHS story. They passed a measure years ago called Measure H. It was a sales tax that had a sunset and funded affordable housing construction and homeless services. And they actually just this November passed a new measure, Measure A, that actually doubled the tax rate and eliminated the sunset completely and made it a permanent tax. So I just want to share that because I feel like we get so stressed and negative, like everything is doom and gloom, and like, y'all, this is amazing. Like the Portland region has this tax that almost 3,000 households are living on locally funded long-term rent assistance vouchers. That's huge, y'all. Like the fastest growing demographic experiencing homelessness is our older adults. Our elders that have worked all are living on fixed incomes, and that's who's entering homelessness the fastest right now. And so how amazing is it that we have local dollars that can actually take care of those elders in our community, keep them housed until they die. That is what is on the table. That is beautiful. And we need to be proud of that. And we need to be like hopeful about like, yes, we do. Like what John said before he left, like we want to continue this money. We got to keep it going. But I also want us to not get bogged down with thinking like that we have to shrink it and make people do more and have crappy outcomes. Like LA County has tons of visible street homelessness, just like us. And yet their voters were like, yeah, double our tax and let's keep it going because we know that this is a need and everybody knows that. And when we Welcome Home talked to the coalition in LA County that passed it, and I said, how did y'all do that? Because up here, I feel like we're a mess and everybody's arguing. And they said, well, voters don't trust government. and just like up here, and they said, we created the measure from the people most impacted and that know that are closest to the issue, the providers and the people with lived experience. And then they were able to go out and tell the voters, this is a measure created by people that understand and live and breathe this issue. And that is how it passed. And I just want to also reflect that Metro showed some polling, and it said the most trusted messengers are homeless services providers and people with lived experience of homelessness. So what LA County saw is actually reflected in our own voter polling here in our region. And I know we're not LA, everybody's unique, but we're another expensive West Coast city. We're not that different either. And so I just want to offer that as like a positive story for us all to reflect on. Thank you. Do you want to say anything?
Thank you, Molly. All right, let's hear from our next table. What was the high level highlight for what you discussed? Would you like this mic?
No.
Okay.
My name is Kabir. I'm part of Habitat for Humanity's board. We had a pretty lively conversation here about the challenges with the stability of existing programs and how much the situations have changed from when this project or when this measure was first passed to where we are now economically in our cities and in our counties. And so managing some of the short-term challenges, we recognize that we're we're trying to manage short-term challenges with some of the long-term priorities is a major issue. There's also, Mayor Beatty talked significantly about the pressure on our current homelessness services that are being faced by general fund and the dichotomy with the lack of visible impact on houselessness. So we're working through that. And then we talked quite a bit about the nuances around the fundamental shift in underlying conditions, how much is being funded by general funds in some of our communities and our cities versus what is needed from a dollar perspective from some of these measures. So the challenges around the timing of the measures seem constrained. Anything you want to add?
Different from tensions, Angela Martin was here together. Different from tensions, I want to call out the lack of tension. Everyone in this room, I think, maybe minus one or two people, are aligned on the goal of stability long-term. Our tension is around how do we manage the short-term issues. And so that, I think, for us was encouraging. We're like, wait a minute, we all want the same thing. We're debating how best to get there. So that feels a lot closer than it might sound listening to all the tensions. So I think that's where we ended it. Violently, what'd you say? Violently agree.
Thank you very much. All right, last but not least, our table here. Who's our volunteer who's going to share out?
It's me and Amanda. So you get to, but hi, Jenny Lee, with the Coalition of Communities of Color. And we did a pretty, I think, deep dive in talking about the stability, and a lot of those themes have come up. But in terms of values, intention, speaking at a high level, I think there's with regard to pragmatism, there's some significant differences in the political analysis, and that's in significant tension with stability. And then related to that, there's the sense of urgency, and that really there's some, let's say, folks with just fundamental questions of different perspectives in terms of the urgency. There is also transparency, that it also exists in tension with urgency. And that's both political, about some of the context of what we're dealing with for viability, even for the information we all have, as well as other conversations that aren't taking place in this room. And and that's leading to, I think, challenges in arriving at a shared understanding, impacting trust. And I think, yeah, Amanda, would you like to add some more of the detail? Thanks.
Hi, I'm Amanda Saul from Home Forward. I don't know if I'm going to add any more detail, but I was just going to say that I think I agree with what Angela Martin was saying, that like we all have the same end goal. We want to continue to house and serve people who are homeless and struggling, and it's just a matter of how we get there. And out in the hall, I was talking to someone from NARA who's left, and she just like had a moment and reminded me that Clackamas County Housing Authority, Home Forward, and NARA have really successfully been housing chronically homelessness folks for over 2.5 years, and 100% of those folks have stayed housed. And that is possible with this SHS measure. And I think we need to keep going and keep working to figure out how we can do this together, because we're doing it and we just got to keep doing it. So thanks.
Thank you. Yes, thank you all. And thank you for elevating those successes, right? I think that has certainly been a theme of today's conversation, of needing to highlight the good work that has been done and continues to be done every day. I do want to point out that we have a final reflection sheet on your table. So if there is something else that has bubbled up for you, having heard from your fellow table members here, that you want to capture and provide that feedback to the Metro Council, please use that final reflection sheet. We will be collecting those. And with that, I'm going to hand things back to Metro to wrap things up.
I just want to say thank you for spending your time and energy, resources on this topic. It continues to be the biggest challenge we have in the region. And yet we have a plethora of very, very smart people who all have different perspectives that are being brought to the table of how to solve it. But yet, from my perspective, you are all correct. Because there's no silver bullet. This is silver buckshot. And nobody's here to question the importance of every part of this. But as we go into the future, it's already been said, I'm very concerned about our region and the economics of it. I'm also very concerned about how we stabilize what we're doing. And those are the multiple vague and conflicting goals that we were trying to deal with, right? And as Mayor Beatty said, when there's a lot of money flowing through a system, it's a lot easier for everybody to get along. When there's a lot less money, we have to figure out how to do bigger, better, bolder with what we have. Not necessarily always with less, but maybe it's just stable. So I would just ask that we think about the next 5 years and how we're all going to get through it together to make sure that we stabilize this program and be able to accomplish everything that we've set out to do, and make sure that we stabilize our region, because we need to make sure that we are pulling on every part of the system, which is to grow jobs, family wage jobs, and keep building housing. I think this council is very focused on that and how we can aid and help you do the jobs that you're doing. So with that, I usually do this at the beginning, but I really appreciate you being here today. Raise your hand for being here today. Raise your hand, everybody. Pat yourself on the back. You did a great job. I really just want to say again, the time and resources spent here, I know are going to be well worth it for the region in the end. So thank you.